Welcome to the Art of Growth and our panel season on Enneagram stances and attachment styles. This is the Type 8 panel. Before we get started, if you'd like to process the Enneagram and your growth journey with others on the path, consider joining the Art of Growth community. This is the best place to meet up with other Art of Growth listeners as we support each other in our becoming. You can join today at www.theartofgrowth.org. Theartofgrowth.org is also the place to take a free Enneagram test, a free Enneagram Instincts variant test, or to reach out to us for individual coaching or organizational coaching and consulting. There you can reach out to Joel Hubbard or me, Jim Zartman. In this podcast series, we build on the work we've done in other panel seasons on Enneagram type and instincts. All right, here we go.
All right, well, welcome Type 8s to our Stances and Attachment Styles podcast. I am absolutely excited to be doing this because we are going to learn so much. And we have a range of 8s here because we intentionally went for the different instincts as well. So for those of you who've been following us and following our instincts panels, you are all caught up. So let's jump in. And first of all, introduce yourself. Tell us where you are from.
I'm Cynthia. I'm originally from California, and I moved to Vancouver, Canada in November and have survived the winter, and it's actually sunny today. So I'm in a good mood.
I'm Lisa, and I live in Plymouth, Minnesota. Don't you know, here in Minnesota, but been here all my life, so I got nothing to share there.
I'm Sarah. I am from Arlington, Massachusetts, kind of born and raised Massachusettsian, and I was the resident techie at the Art of Growth and am now coming back as a panelist, which is super fun, and I'm super excited to be here.
The way I first met you was as a panelist, several years ago.
It was. It's true.
Right.
Full circle.
Yeah.
And I am Sean from Chicago. Keep it simple.
Yeah. That's all there is there.
Yes.
All right. Well, as we said, we're going to be looking at stances and attachment styles. The reason why we're pairing those up together really is because we've heard from others who have told us. We had one of our certification students, she's a therapist. She said, geez, this looks a lot like attachment theory, which I use. And so we had Michelle on, and she did a podcast with us, which was a whole lot of fun and very informative. And that's what we want to look at is what are the connection points between those two theories? How does it play out in you? And let me just set up the podcast by saying that both of these models are trying to explain that the kind of ways that each of us go about getting our needs met as it relates to those closest to us. So how do we get our needs met in relationship with our families, with our romantic partners, with our friends? And so that's what we want to find out from each of you. So let's begin with the stances. What is your starting point? What stance do you begin with? What do you go to next? Does it depend on the context?
When you were explaining this all on that podcast, I think that for me, the context is the deciding factor in how my stances stack, because you get to a certain point in your life and a certain age in your life where you go, with my children, I will maybe react one way. With my family, I'll react another. With my parents, I'll react another. With strangers, I'll act another. But I generally start out at and against. And I don't even necessarily consider it, it's not like it's confrontational, because sometimes I think that at or against has a tendency, people have a tendency to think, oh, it's confrontational. I'm just trying to engage with you. Mm-hmm. And so the way I do that is I come at, and then I realize if I'm coming on too strong or it seems like someone's not reacting well, I will definitely go to that withdraw. And the context depends on how quickly I go to the withdraw. And then also because I know that as an 8, that I go to a 5 in stress. Instead of going to that low side of the 5, I kind of have come to a point where I go, oh, this is too much. I need to withdraw. And I'm going to actually access that high side of the 5, where I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to collect myself. I'm going to gather some data, and then I will come back and try to re-engage.
That's a really good, and I'm so glad you said that, because as We can sometimes we can look at just the withdrawn stance or the third stance in our stack as like that's the problem child, and the only time I ever visit that is when there is a problem. When actually there is a real positive side to it. So I'm glad you brought that up. Let me clarify too about at, particularly for those who are listening. When we say at, we're not talking about confrontation. So I appreciate you saying that because it's not always that way. What it is it's really fundamentally about a very boundaried approach. It's very different than the sort of like leaning toward that we'll talk about, that there's the, the against or the at, and then there's the toward, and then there's the away. And toward kind of leans in to do this. Like, I want to meet with you. There's an exchange. I'm going to do my part. You do your part. The at is more boundaried. It's like, let's see where you are, where I'm at, let's be clear about that. But your dominant instinct is what? Why don't you share that as well?
Oh, I'm social.
And then your second?
Is sexual. And those are really close. It was like 92 and 88. And then my self-pres is like 28. So that's very clearly an area I need work on.
Well, that helps it too, because we're looking at your at or against first, and then you quickly go toward. But again, it depends, you're saying, on the context of.
Well, I don't even know if I necessarily go toward. I go at, and then I withdraw, and then I come at again. I don't always come toward. And then after I think about it and I process it, I have to deliberately make a point to come toward. It's just kind of something that I've learned a little bit about myself, but it's definitely something I have to make an effort to do.
Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting. You were sharing the withdrawing second, after that against his first, which is like that, creating that direction. And that's interesting because you're a social, because I've shared that as a social myself. I tend to go toward second. I think the social kind of takes over after the against doesn't work. But that's funny because we both have the same stack, and mine is a little bit reversed to you because, we talk about traditionally, they have the 8 goes to the 5 in stress and the 2 in health. But for some, depending on their instincts, it's actually reversed. So it's interesting how some of us show up differently, even with a similar stack.
So as the other social 8 here, I would say that my natural stance is context based as well. I feel like I'm naturally at to everyone around me. That's where I start. The closer you are to me, the more likely you're going to have a different response though. So, and if I think there's like an agenda that I have potentially. So like if I have with my wife, for example, the closest person when we're talking about attachment styles and those kind of things, I think I may have more toward action with her in general than I do towards almost anyone else. where I'm trying to meet her at a certain level and try to have I have an end goal here, I have a result I want, or something to benefit you. So I'm going to start here, and then I quickly will switch over to at, and then the end result might lead to the avoidance side where I withdraw. I can kind of move around pretty quick depending on reading of the room, which is that 8 side. Where are we at? What's happening? How do I need to move here in order to get the result that I'm looking for?
Well, you just described the against it. It's like trying to get a specific result, right?
Yep.
You have a goal, you have an agenda.
Yep.
Yeah, I really relate to Sean in that aspect with the same stacking, and especially with my partner. I definitely will go to a more toward after my at in order to try to get some resolution within whatever the circumstances.
So you go towards secondary.
Yeah, for sure. And I do tend to lean more towards my 2 rather than my 5 when in circumstances. So I think that has a lot to do with it. Yeah. But I definitely always start with the at 100%, no matter who it is.
Yeah. And you're the self-pres 8, is that correct?
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
I was just going to say that I feel like I go toward first and then either withdraw or against second. And it is definitely like context dependent. And I've been trying to break it down and kind of figure out the magic equation to explain everything. But what I've found is that either how I'm feeling about myself or how I'm perceiving the situation changes, like what stance I go to first. Like if I'm at work, I'm usually toward and then pretty quickly against, because I feel like I'm kind of up against a lot of expectation or lack thereof with people thinking a certain thing about me. Or with relationships, I think this is where like my sexual instinct comes in. I'm much more toward first. And then sometimes when that gets like not too far, but when stuff starts getting real, you know, like if a friendship develops or something, then I kind of start withdrawing a little bit. And I'm like, okay, what is this actually? And it feels really vulnerable to be there, even though it's kind of the first stance that I go to naturally. And then I kind of have to like back up, regroup, and then come back in the toward. But the against can kind of like get mixed in there a lot too, depending on how like, I guess, vulnerable I feel in that moment, because I'm trying to like protect myself.
That's interesting. Can you say more about like how you feel about yourself? You're saying it determines how you might approach others in that way?
Yeah. So I will say that I'm very much still in like the processing phase of thinking about all this, but I can look back on my life. And as a kid, I very much had a learned toward stance. And as a college student and a little bit beyond, when I was in like therapy to kind of overcome some trauma and everything, that's where I really got into the against mostly. And now I'm kind of stepping back from that. And so looking back and seeing those different like stages of my life, when I was a kid, I felt very vulnerable and like I couldn't have a voice. So I was more toward to people please and to not be a problem. As a college student, when I was like becoming myself, I was just like, fuck the world, you know, and like I had a lot more of that against energy. And now kind of depending on the context, like my work is extremely male dominated. I have a lot of leadership roles. That doesn't always go well. And so in those contexts, I find myself going in there feeling like I have to prove something, even though like in my heart, I know that that's not true, but that's my habitual response is against. I have to like tell these mofos what's up, or else they're not going to listen and do what I want them to. Or if I'm like trying to become friends with people, because I love talking to people, I absolutely love meeting strangers. And like, that's much more of a toward like, oh my God, like, how are you? And even within that, I'll kind of shift a little bit to create a connection versus be like, no, this is 100% who I am, like it or GTFO. So does that clarify?
Yeah, it really does. And it's very helpful for me to hear that, because my own experience with eights has been that in some cases I've not felt their againstness at all. Like I have felt much more of their towardness. And I would think, well, am I the one confused by this or what? But I think that shows the flexibility of the eights within the context. And it depends again on a lot on the context as how much of that is going to come through. But if anybody spends time with you individually, all four of you, my guess would be that those closest to you would feel that againstness much more than you would even be aware of it, functioning within you. There's even in the towardness, there's a different feel from an 8 being toward than there is, say, from a 2 being toward. And I think you would probably all concur with that. And so I think what happens with the instinct and just some of your experience growing up, your environment, is that it can mix that toward and at a little bit, so that there's like at times it's indistinguishable to you. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Could I share, as I was thinking about this, I had like a list of questions that I was asking myself to like kind of hone in on what was actually going on. And so the first one was thinking about a situation and a relationship or a moment where these stances would come into play. I was thinking, how did I feel inside versus how I responded outside? Because those were very different for me. And is it how I felt about myself, or is it how I felt about the situation? And then is this a learned habitual reaction, or is this how I truly would have responded if I was in a context where I could have chosen?
That's interesting. I like that.
Those are really good questions. But I wonder if there's like an energy behind it. And some of what you were saying, it made me want to ask you all this question, which is like, I think when people think of withdrawing, that's clear that they're kind of pulling maybe back from people, and toward is moving toward people, wanting to create connection. Then at or against is something else. It sounds confrontational or agenda-ish. Do you think you use that at energy to create connection?
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Say
That's
more. You're
interesting.
all nodding. So I'm like, what do you mean by that? So talk about
That's so interesting. Yeah, you got to explain that.
Yeah, when I was having a conversation with my wife long before we were even dating, one of the first conversations was us having like an in-depth conversation about some of her past, what she had been through, just as friends. And we got to a point in the conversation where she was like, yeah, I don't want to talk about this. And I was like, oh yeah, then we definitely need to talk about this. This is a very important thing. And it was like this, like very weird. Now we're going. Here we go. Let's jump in. Let's go. So it can kind of be a more abrasive, where I'll ask questions that make people squirm a little bit, not in a way that's inappropriate or wrong, but it's just like I'll find that the sticking point and come at that point to get more in depth. And I think on the reverse side, I think the way
that is so romantic there.
I think the way I protect myself from it is I create like a level of depth of comfort for myself where I can allow someone to feel like they're getting close, but they don't know that I've created like an upper barrier of closeness. Where like you'll get deep enough where you're going to feel like you're knowing more intimate things about me, but I've probably created a cap on how far that will go for you. And so that probably changes the context of how I respond with the stances that we're talking about. The people that get further beneath that get different responses than the people above that level.
I actually realized that when you're saying that I have gotten into the habit of, especially with my partner now, that I will say, let me know if I'm asking too many questions, because I'll like start just barreling through with like, oh, really? This. And I like want all the information. And I feel like I'm going at them to try to get it all the time. But I always give a disclaimer. I'm totally cool if this is too much, just tell me, you know?
Yeah, I have a thing I say with my husband and my children. I'm like, let me know if this is too much for you right now.
Yeah.
It's like, can you handle me right now? Because if you can't, that's fine. It's totally fine.
Yeah,
but
just tell me.
I need to know if you are ready to get all of my blah. Can you take it? Because I'm coming hard, coming at you. And I'm not coming at them. I'm just at, and they happen to be there sometimes. Just you're a safe person that I can come at.
Yes.
I don't come at everyone because not everyone can handle me, and not everybody gets to handle me. But so that's been a good tool for us to use, is like, can you handle me right now? And I usually ask that if I think that maybe they're on the fence. And they are very honest with me because they know that I like direct communication because I'm an 8.
Yeah, it should be on a t-shirt. I love that stuff. Yeah, you get several of them that I think would be just fantastic. But yeah, that whole thing of like I'm at and you just happen to be around. I think even though that's hilarious, it does explain a lot of what's happening for the 8. It's the starting point, right? Jim had started with that question about, the at starting point and how that can be also toward, or that there's a toward. And I had started by saying that sometimes they seem tangled up together. I think when we look at the attachment styles, one of the interesting things about the two that are in the middle. So we have the secure, that's at the beginning, and then we have the disorganized, that's at the end. But in the middle, there's these two, and they really tend to be the majority of us, which is either you're anxious, preoccupied, meaning you don't believe you can meet your own needs and you have to have someone else meet those needs, or you're avoidant and dismissive, and that means you don't want anybody else meeting your needs. You meet your own needs. And for the 8, they don't really fit very cleanly in those two categories, because the avoidance sounds like the person that stays back from engaging relationship. And that tends not to be type 8s. But then that anxious, preoccupied of like, I need you to meet my needs, that doesn't fit the 8 either. And that, I think, is caught up within this kind of at and toward stance mixture that we oftentimes see with 8s, again, depending on the context in which that's showing up, because you could be at in a way as well in other situations. So talk to me about that part of you, the attachment styles. Which one do you tend to begin with? And is that also context dependent?
What I found was really interesting is I was in a much different relationship than I am now. And at that point in time, I was what I think is referred to as disorganized within this one. It was the fearful avoidant. And I just did your quiz and I'm like 42% secure in my new relationship, basing my answers off of my new relationship. And what's interesting with the stances is if I look at my old relationship, I definitely leaned more towards away in the stances with how I dealt with things. And so it was really interesting to me to kind of see the difference in my attachment style and then also where my stances were, even though at that moment in time I didn't really know about the stances, and just how much that's changed with having a much different relationship. And it's awesome, honestly.
Yeah, that's so cool. And that's the direction we want to head into, is more towards the secure. And that is what is available to every single one of us. It's not something that, well, you're in that disorganized, so that the secure is not available to you. It is. And you change your situation. And so good for you. And you're in a much better place now. But yeah, we have a sort of like, if you can tune into the place where you might start or you might go to in places of like stress inside the relationship, or if there's a little bit of a gap that starts to build, what do you revert to? If you're in the secure, what do you revert to in those moments?
For myself, I definitely revert to more of the dismissive, which is weird being an 8, but I do realize that I need to be able to handle my own shit. I don't need anyone to take care of me. I don't need anybody to coddle me. Leave me alone and just let me figure it out on my own. And usually I'm able to process things and be able to come to a place where I'm not going to be a total basket case when I'm coming at you. And we're able to actually discuss things in a more mature and like calm manner. But I need that space and I need to be able to have my own processing within it. I don't need you to fix me.
Yeah, head nodding over here. So let's
We got some passion out of you on that one. That was
I love it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That space is huge. Having space, even in my security, because I'm pretty secure. And I was a little bit surprised that I showed up as secure as I did. But again, my marriage, rock solid. My relationship with my kids, rock solid. My relationship with my sisters, rock solid. But also part of that is because I made them secure to me, because I'm the oldest and I'm an 8. And so they are secure to me and I am secure to them. So again, that context is really important. So I'm secure with them, but I can still go to the dismissive really fast. And part of that, again, is because you want to take that break and get that space. And even like you said, get your own, self together before you come back at them. But I definitely know that, like, if I'm having a conversation with my mom or my dad, I start out dismissive. I don't start out secure. And it took me a long time to go, I kind of think that I had a fairly decent upbringing. There's no big crises. But again, as you are on the journey of self-discovery, you go, oh, that's why I'm always on guard with you. It's like, oh, like my sister and I were just talking just the other day about how there's some people that when we're around them, and they're our friends and our family, but we're on high alert. I'm always on high alert with some people, and I don't necessarily know why, and I don't really need to explore that even. I just know that in order to protect myself and to protect my people, that I need to be on high alert around them. I don't think I'm super anxious or disorganized, but definitely I can go to dismissive very, very quickly. And if it's a relationship I don't care about, I'm like dismissive right away. It's like, this doesn't matter. I don't need to work on this. This is fine.
Yeah.
You're dead to me. Whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
The way you were describing that, it almost made me wonder, is it a similar energy that gets applied in two different ways? In one way, it can go, I'm using this intensity to create the connection. You're saying I made these relationships secure around me, but it's almost the same thing that goes, in order to create connection with some, comes like against to the dismissive to others, depending on the context. But it's almost like a similar energy that gets applied in two different ways. Is what it sounded like.
Yes. Now that you say that, that sounds exactly like what it is.
Huh.
Mm-hmm.
I learned something. That's fascinating.
I did
Me too.
I did the test as well. I've done a couple of those attachments tests, and most of it is secure. I think the thing that I do revert to quickly as well is the avoidant part when necessary. And I think that's probably just even in their explanation, they talk about it being the lone wolf characteristic or like archetype. And that is kind of like the type 8. Like, we don't need your opinion, or we don't need you. We can do this ourselves, that type of energy. So anytime someone does kind of cross a boundary that I've created, or maybe I'll just talk about it specifically with my wife, who's the easiest one to kind of see the attachment style with. It can be when she's trying to control something that I don't want to be controlled. That's when I will go to that avoidant state where all of a sudden I'll shut down and be like, all right, I'm not having this conversation right now. We're going to come back to this in a minute. You're trying to control me. I don't like that. So that'll be kind of the conversation we have, and we know it. We talk about it often. So we can get out of it very quickly, but that'll be the time in that relationship where I will kind of turn to that avoidant. It's not very often, but I've learned to kind of at least see myself doing it in the moment, which has been very, very helpful.
This one was really tough for me, honestly. And in general, this like topic feels very raw and vulnerable. And I am kind of pinpointing or attempting to pinpoint why. So I have a lot of thoughts and not a whole lot of answers, but I'll try to be concise. So I also took a few attachment styles quizzes, and most of them came up as secure. And I was like, that's a lie. I'm right. Your test is wrong. Of course. But I did start thinking and looking back on a lot of my like friendships and relationships. It was either very anxious or very withdrawn. And anxious meaning like I would come in and I needed to know certain things. I needed to know that you care. I needed to know that you would ask me things about my life. I needed to know that we had a connection. And there were all these things. And I was like, if you don't do those things, that means you don't care. And there was a lot of assumption in that and what that would look like. And it wasn't that I needed them. It wasn't that I needed to not be self-sufficient. It wasn't that. It was just like, I think that's where kind of the sexual instinct comes in. It's just like, I need that connection. I need to know that that's there, even if I don't necessarily need you to support me in my life. I just need that like chemistry in a way or something, you know, I'm still trying to figure out what that is.
Sarah, is that let me just ask this question, clarifying question. Is that a beating of the grass sort of thing that you're doing when you were doing that thing with checking in with people? Is that like looking for problems, looking for threats?
Yes, because I immediately assume that like the with stance to me most of the time feels very vulnerable and very dangerous because I don't know if the other person is coming at me with the same mentality. And if I'm coming at them with a toward and they're coming at me with an against, it means that they're going to take advantage of me or that they're going to win in a way. And that translates to like attachment style where like the anxious side of me is like, I need to know what's really going on, because also I think the 8 is always looking for that hidden agenda, always looking for the behind the scenes, what's happening and why, what are the motivations. And for there to not be confrontation, even though I personally hate confrontation, it is scary stuff. I would love to avoid it at all costs. However, I will go into it if I have to. There's a lot of at that point where something might become unsafe or that anxious style isn't getting fulfilled in a way, that's when I go to withdrawn and I'm just like, okay, we have to back way up. You cannot be in my life. Here's a wall, go over there. And I need to like come back into myself and figure this out.
Let me ask a question just for clarifying here, because I think this is going to be helpful to our research on this. Is it feels to me very much like even the anxious and the way you're describing that still feels to me like it is you as an 8 assessing the threats and you're looking to surface them if they're there. So you're maybe a little bit more hypervigilant in that approach because of your traumatic past, but it's still very much that. And instead of the sort of anxious style that is, I don't know how to meet my needs, I need you to meet them for me.
Yes.
Does that make sense? So in that sense, I don't think you'd be the classic anxious preoccupied on attachment styles. I think it'd be much more related to the type and the way the type goes about.
Yeah.
Threats. Yeah.
Totally. And I think that the wrench in my data is that I did score insecure, and I did some reflecting, and like I was in a relationship in the fall. It was very withdrawn, pretty non-confrontational. It was just tough. And that same person and I are really good friends now. And that is the relationship or friendship that security that I've experienced that security in, you know, like I now feel very secure, to be myself, to be like, he's very dependable. We're a good team, like it's awesome. So it's interesting to see the shift when it's the same human as well. And kind of like what that has meant, because before, so many of my friendships were also my coworkers or my bosses. Everything included a paycheck, so it was like there was no security in that either. There was also anxiety of, is this truly a friendship? What does that mean for work? If something, it was just all of these what ifs. So there was always kind of that anxious voice happening at all times too.
Yeah, there's something I want to point out in that, and I wonder if the other panelists would relate to this, because there's something in that that's coming up as that at energy. It's like it could be avoidant, it could be dismissive if that is necessary, but it's the same energy that's either setting the agenda or needing to read the agenda to know how to respond. Does that make sense to you guys?
So that would mean then you might approach, even in the places of trauma where you said, I was the peacemaker, I'm I'm putting those words in there. Like, I'm trying to make peace in the home. I'm trying to keep things together. I'm doing all of this. It's still very much you're in charge. You're taking charge of the situation, not necessarily of people, but of your world, your sense of self. And I think that that's key characteristic of those who are in that stance of, the against or the at stance, is even in places of trauma where you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know where I stand and I need to make sure that we're okay relationally. It's very much of that, like, I'm going at this and we're going to figure this out. And so to me, that makes a lot of sense the way you just explained it, Jim. And it seems like that's what is making sense to all of you based on your head nodding. So
I will say that has shifted and gotten a little bit tamer as I have developed the ability to have boundaries. Like the intensity of that and the desperation of that has like plummeted. It's like, we're pretty even keeled right now. I'm just like, oh, that's the situation. Huh. Okay. And it's a lot more just kind of level headed and taking it as it comes, because at that point, I know I have my own back. And when there's a secure relationship, it's like, oh, that person has my back too. And so that intensity of the reaction can come down, and it's more of like a breathing into it than a reaction to it.
Yeah.
I can totally relate with that. Like when you say that, I kind of look back at when I first got up to Canada and where my relationship was at, and coming out of something that was very volatile and the way that I would react to that kind of stuff. And then having to learn how to trust within this relationship, there was times when the anxiousness definitely showed itself 100%. And it's like within the last 4 months or so, it's definitely made a huge shift, just like you were talking about, where it now is like, okay, we got this. I was being neurotic as hell and I need to kind of rein myself in sometimes. And then again, I go to the dismissive part where it's like, when I get in that neurotic state over some stupid shit, it's like, leave me alone. Let me figure this out. I know I need to process this in my own head and work through and talk myself out of the anxiousness, and then come back to it and deal with it in a secure way.
This is fantastic, because these are all very healthy habits. I mean, what you're describing is, people have this notion sometimes out there that like health means no problems.
LOL.
You don't have any stressors or any anxiety or no relational issues. That is not health. Health is, how do you process through it? How are you doing? It's like you have an immune system that's more than just the physical immune system. It's an immune system for psychological health as well. So you've developed a lot of these, and this is a great segue to talking about how do we grow through this, and what are the things you've learned? So I'm eager to hear from you all on that. And you had mentioned, Sarah, the with stance. So for folks who are listening, are like, what if you didn't listen to previous podcasts, you might be like, what is with? So in the stances, and we're describing them as at directional terms. So, against or at, toward, and then away. Those are the three stances. And typically in those stances, there's the 3, 7, and 8 who are in the against or at, and then the 1, 2, 6s who are in the toward, and then the 4, 5, and 9s who are in the away. And so the stance that we've started to talk about is this fourth stance called the with stance. And what we're describing that as is the capacity to know what stance to use at what time. And some of you have already described that the stances are also used as well as, well, the stances themselves, not the attachment styles, but the stances themselves are used also to protect you. And I think that is true. It's not just to get your needs met in relationships, but it's also there to protect you. So at times where you have to be against, times where you have to be away, pull back, right? And times you have to lean in and go toward. And so the with stance is that capacity to stand back, not over-identify with any of them, not be unconscious to the way they're functioning inside you, but to notice, oh, this is really what's happening in me right now. Which one do I want to activate? Which one do I want to lean into more? And so I'd love to hear from each of you as to what are you learning? How are you growing? And maybe share some stories around that.
I think for me, the with, I'll just touch on what you just mentioned there, tends to be where I probably prefer to hang out. Just like what is necessary in this moment, and how do I move the ball forward towards what again, going back to I have an agenda. What is my agenda here? Even if that agenda is like build a deeper relationship, right? Or make this a fun afternoon, whatever that thing is, being the social 8, I'm trying to kind of get the warmth of the room, or like what's happening, what are all the emotions, what's going on, and then pick the stance that fits. I'll give a quick example. I was visiting with my wife's family down in Florida. We were having a very calm conversation. And in that context, normally I'm a little bit more withdrawn, a little bit more like, I'm not going to start anything here. I'm not going to make any confrontational waves, right? Until the room changes and I have to be confrontational. And, recently we just had one of those moments where I got to learn about myself in a very interesting dynamic, because I've been very good about it until, I'm really good at using the dial appropriately. Like, hey, kick up the waves here, turn it down here. But it was a moment where I just kind of leaned in without thinking through it and just responded and started a whole thing with their family, which is a great, fun, deep conversation. That may or may not have ended well, depending on who you ask.
That's a key insight there, my friend. I love how you said that. Because you can walk away being like, that was great.
I did walk away saying that was great, right? My wife, on the other hand, walked away feeling guilty or bad because we had this like hard conversation. Not because it was a bad conversation, but because it was a deeper, we'll say like philosophical conversation that we had. So I think it does depend on your stance and how you're responding and reading the room. For me, what I'm learning is how I can continue to be a more secure version of myself, even in those moments like that, where normally I'm very controlled and it is like an internal thing. It's not really about what's happening around me because I can just utilize what I need. But in that moment, I kind of interacted differently in that moment than I would have normally. So that was a learning moment here just in the last couple of months.
Nice.
I think I'm figuring out what toward really is, because I feel like I have a lot of behaviors that are very toward, but I don't always feel like I'm going toward, that I'm still coming at you, but my behavior is very toward. And I think the difference is, it's like, I call myself, I'm like an alpha maternal female. I'm like the wolf female. I'm going to feed you. I'm going to protect you. I'm going to make sure you're taken care of. And those are all very two behaviors. But I don't feed you because I want you to love me. I feed you because I need you to be strong. And so I'm still figuring out what toward even looks like. And so toward, I feel like I go with way quicker than I go towards. Like my daughter, she was looking for a job and she needed a job. And I felt like I was kind of coming at her a lot. I was coming at her with are you putting out resumes every day? Have you reached out to people in your field who could help you? Why you're spending money on that thing and that I don't think you need? And then she kind of told me to back off, rightly so. So I did, and I withdrew and I collected myself and I gave her some space and I gave me some space. And then I came back at her, but I thought I was coming towards her. And so I came back at her with, I just want to help you. But I was really nice about it. So it seemed more toward like, and I'm like, I sent you 3 job postings for you to look at when you have time. I'm just trying to help you, And what I really should have said if I had moved toward her, or if I was working with her, would have been to say, hey, you know what? I trust you. And I know that you're doing what you need to do. And I am here for you if you need me. And it's like this really subtle difference between here's what I want you to do, and here's what I want you to do what you feel like you're supposed to do, and I'm going to come along with you. And so even identifying that, I'm like, oh, that's very subtle, but one is with and one is still against. And so kind of figuring out in my relationships, identifying those moments where I'm like, oh, I need to back off a little bit and just go along with you. I also don't always trust the towards, because like my dad, the only time he would ever come towards us is when he wanted something, he needed something. And so I don't trust that. So if you're coming towards me, I'm like, what is your agenda? What do you want from me? And if I feel like I'm being manipulated, oh man, I hate that. I am allergic to manipulation. I hate it so bad. But on the flip side of that, it also makes me hesitant to move toward, because I don't want to be perceived as being manipulative. And so I'm still figuring out the difference between toward and with and at, all of these, kind of figuring out what's real and what's maybe needs to take a step back and evaluate and go, maybe the energy here needs to be different.
Yeah. Well, I think you're naming it, and that's really, really good. Right there, that's with. The fact that you're looking at it going, I wonder. Right? That's the beginning of the with stance. Jim, maybe we'll do a podcast just devoted to explaining what that looks like, to move toward, if you're not in the toward stance, and how to do that. But that is with the way you just described. Like, if I now understand the subtle difference, right? And you'll glimpse at it and then you'll forget and then you'll come back to it. I mean, that's just the way it works. I mean, as of the last 2 weeks, I've had a new, significant insight into how much my againstness shows up in my relationship to my wife. Like, wow, I've never seen that ever in my entire life. And no matter how many times she said things to me, I just didn't see it. And suddenly it's, oh, that's what's happening. And that's the way it shows up. So I think part of it is just growth. And that's a great, I think, explanation of what that looks like for you. So yeah, that's growth.
It's also so much easier to just withdraw. So much easier to not. It's like, self-awareness. Why is it so hard?
Yeah.
It's just easier to withdraw. And so making the effort to not withdraw is also a huge thing.
Well, the with stance is not a satisfying stance. It's just not. I mean, we're not going to go into it going, oh, that felt so satisfying. Right. It works against your starting point. And that's how you know you're doing it right. It's like, boy, everything in me is wanting to do this right here or this, right? So it's interesting. It's not just one, it's also the other extreme, right? We have the first and we have the second. And then we even have the third if nothing else works. And the with stance says, not this one, not that one, not that one. Stand back, breathe, observe, and now move alongside, move with that person. Now, in some cases, it means also move against, or it means move, withdraw. It depends on the situation. It is very difficult, no doubt.
And I can speak a little bit to what the toward looks like for the 8, because it probably looks different when embodied by different types. But I think for the 8, the starting point tends to be, I have an agenda. That's what at or against is there is an agenda and I'm trying to direct an agenda. And sometimes the toward is the practicality of the 8, where it's just, it wants to see things get done. And so it's like, I'm going to go along with your agenda because it's going to make the whole look better. And so the at to the toward can shift, because instead of I have to direct the agenda, I can go into the flow of your agenda, because that's going to make the whole thing work better.
I had to learn that the hard way with my wife, because anytime she was telling me a story, I wanted to chime in with a way to do something. And she had to teach me multiple times that I shouldn't do that. I don't need an answer. I don't need a solution. I just need you to be with me in this conversation and, let me solve it. You're just an echo board for me in the moment. So we've gone over that years and years and years before I eventually got it. But yes, I can see that in the toward for sure.
I had a big experience with my little brother. We have 21 years difference between us. I was more like a mom to him. And I'm also the oldest of all of the kids. And I realized actually just last week when we were having a conversation, how much I try to steer everything in his life. He's the youngest, he's the baby. I've always had to be like, I'm going to protect this little guy, and he's an adult now. And it's like, I can't just be coddling him all the time. And we had this conversation and in the middle of it, I realized that I was totally going at him, and I was like telling him what he needs to do. You need to do this, 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 and this. You shouldn't do this. You shouldn't do that. And then I stopped myself and I was like, you know what? It's not worth it to have this argument. I'm with you. Whatever you decide, it's not like you're about to go jump off a bridge or go kill somebody. So, you're on the right track. It's just not what I want you to do. So I stepped back and just supported him in what he wanted. And it was, even though I felt like I was with him in it, like you were just saying, it's not always the best thing. Afterwards, it actually felt so good to just support him and not be the bitch that is always telling him what to do. And it was actually it was a really beautiful moment with him because he's a cool little guy, 24-year-old cool little guy that towers over me now. But it was a really great thing. And I realized, even just because I had been studying the stances, I need to move more towards this because I don't need to be the one that dictates everything for him anymore. Well, I should have probably never done it, but now I understand.
That's great. Really good.
The thing that comes to mind is something that happened at work a couple weeks ago. I am the production manager for an event, and so I often find myself in the decision-making role. And a company was very late in getting me certain information that was kind of delaying all this other stuff that had to happen, and it was kind of creating a little bit of chaos. And I was getting really defensive and like taking it personally. And I was like, these people are trying to sabotage me. And this is the inner monologue that was happening. It's like, this is a personal attack on me that they haven't gotten this done yet. And that's not true, but like, it was a lot of the against energy. And the response that I was coming up with was like, I need to show these guys what's what. And I need to like establish myself as the dominant decision maker. It was like a alpha battle. I don't know how to describe it. And again, this was all internal monologue, but in that moment, I was like, wait a minute. Nobody wants this to go terribly. Like, nobody wants this event to crumble. We're all here because we want to do it. We want it to go well. And like, maybe there's just more than what I'm seeing, And so I like took a step back, and that's where like the withdrawing really helped me. Cause I like took a step back, realized what was me, realized what was them and what was frustrating. And then was like, okay, I am in the decision-making role for this. That is true. So to go with the toward energy or the with more towards though, it felt like I was just becoming the yes man in a way. And so in that moment, I couldn't do that. I still needed this information to make the other stuff happen. And so it was a very interesting game of like kind of playing through all the stances and being like, which one? This one? No, this one, no. Like, so it was very interesting to try to navigate all of those and then eventually land on a like, okay, we're all here. We all want this to go well. I'm just going to share my situation and why I'm asking for this information, why it's urgent. And they can do with that what they need to do with that. And we can have a conversation and it will get done and it'll be fine. So I think I'm learning that balance of stepping back. And, we talk about seeing the whole and still walking into it, seeing the whole and walking around it and kind of being able to look at the whole, be like, yep, there it is. I'm doing the thing. Let's see if there's another option in this situation. And it's been interesting to see that I've had that experience in processing with my type. I had that experience in processing with my instinct. I have that experience in processing my stances, like every single step of the way, it comes back.
Yeah, I said it's not satisfying when we shift, the initial shift of going out of our dominant stance. But what's remarkable is that on the other side of it, I think I've noticed, I don't know about you, I noticed that when I choose the with stance, that there's a kind of going away of that frenetic or that intense energy that's present around the dominant stance. So it's a quieting. So it's as if the need that was there is no longer there when I choose the with stance. Wondering if that has been also something that any of you have noticed as well.
You used the phrase restful being. And I've thought a lot about that since we talked. just kind of like, what does that look like? I feel like I go with in any of the stances when I am like being true to myself, but kind of that restful being. And it doesn't mean calm, and it doesn't necessarily mean non-conflict. It just means it's just a restful being. It's kind of like, oh, this is what it is. I'm going to move through it. I have choices to make. Instead of just going to a default, it's like making a choice about my response instead of going to a default reaction. And so I just really like that phrase, restful being.
I really like Sarah's statement, in all of these different situations, I keep going, is there another way for me to respond to this? Because I feel like that's if I was to sum up so much of the eightness, it's just kind of like, I go this way. And so much of it is going, oh, there's other ways. Like Sean was even talking about, I can change the volume knob on this dial. I can dial this up or back. I can consider there's another way. And I just go, man, I want to highlight that because I feel like every 8, like that's the ultimate 8 lesson is, oh, there's another way to respond to this.
Totally. I feel like one of the things that I've realized just after the last couple of years of studying the Enneagram and everything, I have learned to be conscious of how aggressive I can be. And that has been such a huge growth for me within so many different aspects of my life, because there was a lot of time where it didn't matter if it was some stranger that was on the road with me or someone in a grocery store or just somebody in my life, that I would be aggressive with my manner of dealing with them. And now to have more of the tools to be able to look at how I can react to something differently and not just come at everybody with such aggression every time. It's been a huge deal in my life. I'm still a teddy bear in combat boots, but I know how to deal with it a little bit better.
I love that.
I love that so much.
Oh, great.
That's what my partner calls me.
Can I get that on a t-shirt?
I know.
Right?
That's awesome. I love it. It's in the goal of all of this, obviously, is that our relationships become better and that we become better within those relationships. It's so rewarding when there's a sense of, oh, what I did differently this time produced this better result. Like, yeah, we are better. We are more connected. So while it didn't scratch the itch of like, I need to be against, I need to push, I need to make this happen, the result was deeper intimacy, deeper connection, and a sense of well-being internally. And so that's the hope in all of this for all of us. So I just wanted to wrap up with that and just say thank you to each of you so very much for having been on this podcast, for having opened up your hearts, your minds, and shared with us what the stances and attachment styles look like and how they function through you. So thank you very, very much to each of you.
Thanks for listening to this episode. You can follow us on social media or sign up for our newsletter at theartofgrowth.org. You can also go there to sign up for the community or to reach out to us for coaching. But hey, since you're here, why not stick around for another episode? Grace and growth, my friends.